Assalamu alaikum sisters and welcome to Real Muslimah Talk. I'm your host Abdurrahman, and on this podcast we'll pull back the curtains, take down the barriers and have raw, insightful and honest conversations on living as a Muslimah in our modern society. We'll discuss everything from spirituality to mental health, from marriage to growth and much more. So sit back, relax, grab yourself a coffee and let's have a heart-to-heart here on Real Muslimah Talk. If you enjoy the podcast, head over to our Instagram page at Real Muslimah Talk and join the conversation. So what would you say are like the top qualities that, for example, a person should have or should strive to have within a marriage in order to, allow it to thrive?
Okay, so in my opinion, I think one of the key factors of being able to survive in a marriage is to be laid back, understanding, empathetic. I think those are like the main words for me. But then, of course, there are other factors as well in terms of like honesty, selflessness, being faithful. You've got those as well. But I think laid back, understanding, I think those two, empathetic, those three are the most important factors for me personally.
Okay, interesting, because even those I would say, laid back didn't really come to mind, but yeah, definitely understanding, empathetic. And for me, here's the thing, right? So you have the base, right? And then upon which all of these other qualities are built. So of course, the base is going to be taqwa and mindfulness of Allah, right? And then based on that, all these other qualities are going to be added to that. So that's kind of like the foundation, because I do know that, for example, partners can have sometimes qualities such as, understanding and empathetic and all that. But if they ultimately don't have their own mindfulness of Allah and know that, ultimately they're going to be questioned for their own actions. Each individual in the marriage, is going to be questioned for their own actions. And, when it comes down to, for example, like, arguments and things like that, what helped me, so in the beginning, I never really used to, like to say sorry at all, because I felt like it was not my fault. So why should I say it? You know what I mean? And I was quite, fortunate in a way, alhamdulillah, that my husband was okay with saying, sorry, being the first one to say sorry. So I kind of, relied on that. But as, we started to progress in the marriage, I feel like it kind of dawned on me that if, the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, that if you give up an argument, I guarantee a house, I think, is in the middle of Jannah for the one who gives up an argument even though he's right. And I see you smirking there. Basically, so you see, with me is that at times I thought, I'm not going to say sorry. I'm not going to, give into this because I feel like I was, right. But then I would remind myself of this and I would say, you know what, at the end of the day, not only do I get reward in the hereafter for this, but also I'll see the reward in this life, even though I'm, slightly lowering myself to a way where, I'm kind of apologizing for something I don't necessarily believe that I'm wrong. And I found that it really does help. Like, it just,
yeah.
What do you have to say?
I agree with you. I agree with you 110%, and I'll tell you why. I'm very similar to you. My apologies need to mean something. I'm not going to say sorry if I don't think I'm wrong. And until today, I do still have that principle and that belief. However, like it's definitely a hadith that I've found really hard to kind of act upon. But I really like, with me also, what I've learned about myself is sometimes when I'm preaching something, it pushes me to act upon it as well. So when I've had somebody get in touch with me because they want some advice, or because, they want me to help them, or because maybe I'm delivering a class or a lecture or a seminar, what I actually started doing is I started mentioning this hadith, and that kind of forced me to now act upon it, because for
Yeah.
me, if I'm preaching something, I feel really hypocritical if I'm not going to act upon it myself. So then I have started acting upon it, and it makes the world's difference. What is it? It's our ego. It's our ego that's pushing us
Yeah.
to not say sorry. And yeah, you do feel like, you weren't even in the wrong. Why should you apologize? But do you know what? I do apologize. And do you know, there were times when I'd say things like, well, I'm sorry you feel that way. And my husband is quite an intelligent
Mhm.
person. So he'd be like,
Yeah.
that's not an apology.
That's yeah.
I want you to be sorry. You are like, you know, basically using your words. So and I think back and I think, oh my gosh, that's so true. I was like, twisting my words so that I'm not really apologizing, when
Yeah.
really, like, you just apologize if you need to. That doesn't mean that now every single time you should keep on apologizing, but sometimes I think you need to be smart enough to be able to gauge when and when you shouldn't. So I
Yeah.
think definitely just apologizing even when you're not in the wrong,
Yeah.
or just to give up the argument, is definitely something that really, really helps in a marriage. And I can guarantee that because I've experienced it firsthand. Because now I do apologize, even though I know, like, it's not
Yeah.
even my
Same here.
fault. But I'll just be like, oh, you know what? I'm sorry. I'm very
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah.
And I think my tone probably even gives it away that
Yeah.
I'm not even really sorry. But then I think just the fact that you say sorry, and you give up that much of your ego, I think the opposite person is able to appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, so even I was like that as well, where then slowly I would be saying sorry, but it would be a but. Do you get me? I'm sorry, but I had to do it. You know what I mean? Like I'm sorry, but like
But the
adding
buts
this
have to be
extra
removed as well.
justification. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's not also, an apology. And
Mm.
what you said about the tone of voice, I feel like, see, for my husband, even the tone of voice matters. So it was like, yeah, you're saying sorry, but you're saying it like you don't even mean it. And then I was like,
No, no, that's
oh
definitely
shit,
happened
this.
to me too. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's yeah, yeah, yeah. That's definitely the case for me as well. But I think, like, really practicing your tone, and yeah, it's hard. It's hard work, but I think you definitely get there. And it's one of those things that's just a work in progress. Like, you
Yeah.
just got to
Yeah.
keep working at it.
Definitely. um yeah, and then we mentioned, both of us, we mentioned the quality of empathy, right? And I feel like,
Hmm.
see, the thing with empathy is that why it's so important is, like we've been mentioning, is that there's so many factors that come to play when it comes to for example, your spouse's behavior towards you. So not only for example, what you did that triggered it, but why did it trigger him in that way? Well, it's to do with a whole host of factors, such as their upbringing, or what they used to, or what their expectations are, etc. So when
Mm,
you have
mm,
empathy, you're kind of putting yourself in that position and thinking, like, for me, I think to myself, well, yeah, I do, for example, get mad at sometimes if he doesn't, pick the initiative to actually help me in certain things around the house. But then I think to myself,
mm,
well, if I was in his situation, like if I put myself in his situation, right, and growing up, having maids helping around the house, and if my parents did everything for me, where I didn't have to lift, a spoon, and then coming to, the uni, and basically just doing anything that I wanted, however I wanted. I mean, of course, it's not going to come to me naturally to be the initiator of help. You know what I mean?
mm.
So then
I
I was
understand.
thinking to myself that then you have greater compassion towards them, and then
Yeah.
instead of like just expecting them to do it, I think then you sort of understand where they're coming from, and then you kind of feel better that you're reminding them, instead of just be like, oh, why didn't you do it?
Mm, mm. Yeah,
So
I
yeah,
agree. You
yeah,
know
and
what
then
you were saying about, yeah, sorry, go on.
no, I was going to go on to another quality. So is there anything that you wanted to mention? I
Okay,
was
carry on. Yeah.
okay. So another quality, like you said, to be laid back, and I feel like that maybe ties in with compromise. So like
Mm,
just being easygoing, and like where it needs to be that you are the one that has to give up something. um
mm,
you know, as long as, of course, you know, it's a give and take, meaning it doesn't have to be in the exact same way. You know, nowadays I feel like a lot of women, we're being fed this notion that men and women are equal. You know, men and women are not equal, and they're never going to be equal, but they have like, they, what's the word that's not equal, but equity, like they
yeah, 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 yeah. Mm,
yeah, so the men and women, for example, they don't need to share the chores 100%, like, oh yeah, so if I do the dishes today, tomorrow you do the dishes. It doesn't necessarily have to be like that. It can be, for example,
yeah,
something as simple as, you know, well, I do the dishes, and you know, you can I don't know, pack the laundry away, you know what I mean? Something, it
yes,
doesn't have to
yes,
be necessarily. And also, it may not be, for some couples, it may not be that they share household chores. However, the overall contributions to the marriage is shared. So, for example, the man is the one that's, you know, always providing, and like, if, let's say, for example, the car breaks down, they fix the car, or they, you know, take care of things like that, the lawn or the gardening, etc. Right?
yes,
Um,
mm,
and the woman, she takes care of other things, like, um for example, if her she doesn't mind, like, washing the dishes or putting the laundry away and stuff like that. So it
mm,
doesn't necessarily, my point is that when it comes to compromise, it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be compromised on every area in an equal way. You know what I mean? It can be compromised
yeah,
in a way that maybe, you know, doesn't really look fair or equal, but it is.
yes, yes. I agree.
uh
Yeah.
yeah.
Mm.
So you were saying something, sorry, earlier.
Yeah, no, so your like what you were saying about being understanding and being laid back and all of that, it just reminded me back to what we were just discussing previously, and how you were saying that you didn't like, you literally just got into the marriage. You didn't really like listen to podcasts or do much reading or all of that, right?
Yeah.
And I remembered, like, in the first episode that we were recording, and when we were talking about looking into getting married, I said that there are some books and articles that you can read, but I couldn't remember the names. So what
Yeah.
I actually did is I remembered them and I wrote them down, just so that we can share with the viewers, because I do feel so. I'm more of a reader than a listener, but I do know
Yeah.
that there's lots out there that you can listen to. I mean, like today we're having this podcast, and we do hope that it will help some sisters, inshallah. And you've got so many lectures and seminars online and things like that. But also there are articles online, and there are some books that I would recommend every sister. Actually, no, every sister, even when she's like, when they're in their courting phase or whatever it is that you want to call it, she also requests her fiance or her potential to read as well. Because a lot of the times, like you, Sister Abdurrahman, like you mentioned earlier, that men are a little more nicer at the beginning. So like if you ask them to do something, they're more willing to do it at the time, because like
Yeah.
once you're married, it's like, well, like you
She's
say,
my
like
wife.
I own
Yeah.
her anyway. Yeah, yeah, she's my wife, so what? So like so some of the books that I read were, um so one of them was The Five Love Languages by, I think
Mm.
it's called Dr. Gary Chapman, or just Gary Chapman. And that book, I don't fully like, do you know, the thing with me is that I'm like, I constructively criticize a lot of things when I read them. So
Yeah.
there are things that I don't agree with, but the overall genre of the book, and the tone of the book, I think it's so important that to learn each other's love languages, because you know, sometimes you're loving the person the way you want to be loved, but they don't want to be
Yeah.
loved the way you want to be loved. And I think that
Yeah.
that's really important. And there's a sheikh that's actually Islamified these love languages as well, so that's quite interesting.
Is it?
Um,
What? Which? Who is it?
okay, so Dr. Yasir Qadi,
Okay.
he's actually Islamified them, and I love what he's done. He's used the non-Muslim version of the book, and he's just Islamified it, and I think that that's really profound what he's done. Uh, then there's a
What's
book
the?
now.
Does he
Oh,
have it? Does he have it in a book
no,
form?
it's just like, I think you just
No.
YouTube it. You know what? One day I just came across it on
Okay.
Facebook, and it had subtitles, which is why I ended up even listening to it, because I just read. But I think like if you searched it on YouTube, Yasir Qadi, the 5 love languages or something, I'm pretty sure it would come up. If you search
Okay.
enough, you'll definitely find it, inshallah.
Yeah.
And then there's this book called The Surrendered Wife. And as much as it sounds like, what? Surrendered wife? A lot of what's inside, even for someone that's been married for 10 or 20 years, I would advise the sister to read this book. And I think I think that it has a lot of there's a lot of lessons that you can learn from it. At the beginning of the book, the woman actually says, if you don't want to self-improve, put this book away. She's really passionate about really just making marriages work and ending divorces generally and stuff like that. Then there's
Okay,
another
can I
book
just ask you a
called
question? Is
yeah.
that book basically is that book what the title, meaning
No,
does it go with the title or no? Yeah.
no.
Okay.
Like there are some parts where you're just gonna get really angry, but
Yeah.
you've got to persevere and keep reading, because honestly, it's for the greater good. So I think it's definitely worth reading. Like I said again, there's certain things I don't agree with. Like there's something she mentions in the book where you should share all your finances or something like that. For me personally, that's not my Islamic belief. I don't believe Islamically a man and a woman have to share all their finances. So like that's
Yeah.
something I definitely disagree with. And there are a few other things now. I don't remember. I read it so many years ago, but
Okay.
there's that. Then there's another book. I haven't read the whole thing, but I've read snippets, and it's called Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus. And I think that
Yeah, that's
also
a
is
really
a
popular one
really,
that
really
people have
good
heard,
book.
but I've never,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I've never read that.
I actually have these copies. I have my own personal copies, and I lend them to people. Sometimes it's like they're going through a rough patch, or they're about to get married, or they're wanting to get married, and I just lend my books out because I know how important it is to read. And then
So
there's
does it
this book.
explain, does that book explain how men and women are different, etc.?
Yes, yes, it definitely does. It explains how men and women are different, and the genders are different. And we have to be able to accept that the genders are different. And it's scientifically proven. And for me, I personally believe like if something is scientifically proven, you don't argue with science. The sexes are different. And this book explains how we're different to each other.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And then there's this one book that I've actually never read, but it's called The 7 Principles of Making a Marriage Work. Or it's called Gottman's 7 Principles. And he
Yeah,
has like
Gottman.
all these
Yeah, I've
YouTube
heard.
lectures. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Is it Gottman or Gottman? I'm actually not sure how his name is pronounced, but I've heard really, really good things about it, but I've never actually read um,
Yeah.
his book. And then there's this one book that has just come out recently, and that's by a Muslim. Uh, is it Mufti Abdurrahman Mangera, I think is his name. And he released a book, I think last year or the year before, and it's called A Guide to a Healthy Muslim Marriage. And you know, when this book came out, I was like, yeah, I'm definitely going to find something I disagree with here. But you
Yeah.
know, as I read through it, I just could not find anything to argue with.
Is
All
it?
of it was just so well grounded. And the reason why is because he partnered up with a sister to actually write the book.
Mm.
So like it's like it's his name on the cover, but there was a sister that actually had a lot to do with it. And I think that that book is absolutely amazing. And I would gift it as a present to somebody as well, because I think it's really important for both man and woman to read this book.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
But well, that's really nice. Jazakallah khair for sharing, because now at least the sisters have something they can go back and do more
yeah.
research into. For me, I read this one book that was like after, meaning
Okay.
I think it was about one year or so after I got married, and it was called Traversing the Highs and Lows of Marriage by a sister called Sadaf Faruqi or something. Yeah,
Okay.
but the title is Traversing the Highs and Lows of Marriage, and I felt like when I was reading it, I felt like I was getting advice on like personal things that were actually going on. You know what I mean? Because
Oh,
she
okay.
goes through like a lot of issues as well, and kind of putting the advice on it on. And yeah, so that was for me. That
So I
was
just want to write that down. If you could just say
yeah.
the title again and her name.
Traversing the Highs and Lows of Marriage by
Okay.
Sadaf, Sadaf Faruqi. So,
Oh, okay.
yeah,
Jazakallah. I'm gonna check it out, inshallah.
yeah,
Yeah.
definitely do. I think, see, gone are the days where I think women read things like how to be a perfect wife and all that. I think now it's like, understanding how we can both make it work. You know what I mean? I
I
mean, the
agree.
surrendered wife kind of sounds like, maybe how to be a perfect bride or whatever, but you said it's kind of different inside. There's like a plot twist.
Yeah. The title is not what it seems. When I first saw the title as well, I was like, oh yuck. But
Yeah,
when I actually read it, I was like, oh wow, subhanallah. Like, and the thing is, like, there's not enough Muslim content out there as well. Like, these are all non-Muslim books apart from A Guide to a Healthy Muslim Marriage. But do you know what? It works for everyone. It's just it's just this thing that helps people globally. It doesn't really matter,
yeah,
what
yeah,
language you speak, what religion you are. Yeah.
yeah. There is a program that I think Yasir Qadi and a few others do. It's called Like a Garment. I'm not sure if you've heard of it. I personally
Yeah,
haven't
yeah.
listened to it, or
Mm,
but I have come across the advertising of it.
mm. So when my husband and I had our online interactions, he had actually advised me to look into that, and also he had sent me a clip from Yasmin Mujahid about fairy tales and marriages and stuff. And I literally listened to them because he sent them to me. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't have. And a lot of what
Wow.
he said made sense. Um,
Yeah.
I think at the time you didn't have times two speed on YouTube. Either you didn't have it, or I didn't know how to use it, or what it was. This was like what, 6.5, 7 years ago.
Yeah.
But like, it was really interesting what he was saying about like how men and women are different and how things work in a Muslim marriage. And then he even had a small PDF on the intimacy side of things, which I think is so important for both woman and man in a Muslim marriage, because like we mentioned in the previous episode, people really do suffer when it comes to intimacy as well, because like they've just taken to pornography to learn about it, and they don't realize that like that's not how you learn about intimacy. So
Yeah.
yeah, it was quite good.
Yeah. There is there was a book on sexual intimacy. I'm not too sure about the title, what it was called, but it was written by a Muslim author, a man called, I can't really remember because it was like a while back.
I
When
think I
one of my
think
friends
I
gifted
know.
it.
It's got a red cover.
Yeah, yeah.
um Wait, I know this. The Muslim's Guide to Sexual Relations, or something like that. But do you know what? If you Google it, it will definitely come up.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
remember the guy.
So
I don't remember the title, the author's name, but I know
yeah.
which book you're talking about.
Yeah, so one of my friends gifted that to me. It was a real eye opener in a sense, because of course, we as Muslims, we don't experience this, and secondly, our families and all that, they're not really that open about discussing all this. So
Yeah.
reading it is like the best option, especially it was a Muslim thing, so the things that you're allowed, not allowed, and how to get by really.
Mm. So funny you should mention this. So whilst like my mum would never have spoken to me about stuff like this, because I had older friends, they actually like threw like a girls' party for me. And in
Okay.
that party, there were actually intimacy related questions, and whether or not like this is halal or whether it's not halal. And it was literally like a twist to like a bridal shower kind of thing.
Okay.
And it was, like it was an eye opener for like a lot of girls at the party who were either newly married or hadn't been married. But I think I was like one of the last to get married though, because I was like one of the youngest. But
Yeah.
like the fact that, you're going through these questions, and like, there was like, I remember the two friends who organized it, like they had organized it such like, is it true or false, or like there'd be like a case study question. And I think it's so important to have friends like that, to have friends that are like concerned for your deen enough to educate you in this regards, because like I said, our parents are not okay doing that. Like my mom and dad will never have discussed these things with me.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, definitely. Interesting. Yeah, so going back to what we were talking about in terms of the key ingredients or key qualities to happy marriage, to help it to thrive. Um, we mentioned, about understanding, empathy. Is there anything that maybe, you want to mention about, for example, like the roles, responsibilities, house chores, etc.? I know I touched upon it, saying that it doesn't necessarily have to be divided 100%.
Mm. I think for me personally, understand that in a Muslim marriage, there are traditional gender roles. And when you hear the word traditional gender roles, you get all like, especially in the world with the feminism cult and everything, you've got people like that are already ready to argue with you. But you know
Yeah,
what? Islam is so perfect that it's already given us
balanced.
roles, and it's given us balanced roles. And it's not like, you won't actually find a hadith that says um a woman must cook. Like, it's not going to
Yeah,
come up like that in the Quran or in the hadith. But the general overview that you are going to get is that the woman is going to be a mother. Like, one of the key reasons that we do get married is to have children, and the mum will play a large role in bringing up this child inside the home, and she will have so much
yeah,
to do with the tarbiyah and with the education. I mean, like, there's a famous saying by this Arab poet, I think, and he says al ummu madrasa or something like that,
yeah,
where
yeah.
he's saying the
It's
mother is the school. Or, and like, to be able to understand that Islam has given you this, and then Islam has given men the role to provide and to be the breadwinner. And that's not to say that it's going to be like this in every single case, because like I said, the dynamics of every single marriage are different. But we've been given rough guidelines, and I think to be
yeah,
able to accept those, and also
yes,
not using Islamic politics. Like, people are always about like my right, his right, my right. That's not how a marriage will work. Like,
yeah. Yeah, that is like a point that I would really like to emphasize on, is the fact that, if we're going to be boiled down about my right, his right, each person fighting for their rights, and just, sticking to, oh, is this obligatory upon me? Oh, okay, so if it's not, then I'm not going to do it. Well, what you have to understand is that marriage isn't just about what's obligatory upon you and what is your right and responsibility. It's actually about making the marriage work. um and if you want the marriage to work, there's going to be times where you're going to have to do more than your sort of bare like responsibilities. But at the same time, there's going to come a time where he's going to have to step up and do more. You know what I mean? It's not going to be all about, oh, tit for tat.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And like, when you bring in Islamic politics, like, especially for me, Alhamdulillah, I haven't had to experience this, but a lot of the times it's such negative behavior. It's like toxic behavior almost, and you start resenting the person because they're reminding you of their rights. Clearly,
Yes.
before you got married, you've educated yourself on your rights and his rights. There's no need to kind of like keep going at it and taunting the other person about those rights, because the marriage will not thrive. It's not going
Yeah.
to work if you're just
Of
going to keep
course,
going
this
on
is.
about rights.
Yeah, unless, one of the parties is just not even playing their role at all. Like, it's
Yeah,
just, for
yeah, yeah.
example, upon the woman to do everything, or upon the man to just do everything, then okay, you can
Mm.
bring in rights. But I'm saying, as for like in everyday matters, oh yeah, it's not my duty to cook, or I don't need to cook. You know what I mean? I'm just doing
Yeah,
this
yeah,
for you. No. Um,
yeah.
but
I
having
think to
said that,
constantly.
I do believe, like, for example, for me personally, I believe that it's not necessarily the woman's, responsibility to cook, or, yeah, she can cook, like for example, you know, the basics. And but as for nowadays, you know, sometimes men, they expect like 3-course meals and all this fancy
Yeah.
stuff and whatever. I don't believe that. But having said that, there will be many times where I do step up and I do it, and I don't remind my husband to say, oh, you know, by the way, this is not what I, you know, my right or whatever. But subhanallah, it's
Yeah.
just to bring about more love and to bring about, you know, more of a connection in the marriage.
I think what you've mentioned, it depends on what each individual wants from a marriage. So if there is a man like that and he wants a wife where he's going to go home and the table's going to be set out and he wants her to be like basically a full-time homemaker and housewife, I think that he needs to make that clear from the beginning. Um, and also, if a woman feels that she's unable to live up to this, she needs to be clear about that from the beginning as well,
Yeah,
because like we
yeah,
all have weaknesses and some of us are unable to kind of deliver that. So like you, again, like as a man, as a woman, it boils down to what you want initially. So like if, you know,
yeah,
as a man you've said that, no, look, I'm going to get like all the help that you need in the house, I'm going to give you, but I want you to be a stay-at-home mom and you need to be at home all the time, and I want you to be able to like cook nice meals and to host and to feed visitors and things like that. Then if he's been clear about that,
yeah,
then she then doesn't really have a right to then make issues about it later on, because he was very clear about it from the beginning.
yeah, yeah, definitely. You know, I just remembered actually, you were asking me about because obviously I've said how the the early stages of marriage were extremely difficult for me. So you said, you
Yeah,
know, what made you like continue? And I
yeah,
just remembered now that one of the, you know, along with advice from my dad, who was understanding and, you know, he put things into perspective, but also taking time to be apart from one another. Because there were times when I went
space.
to, yeah, because there were times when I went, you know, to on vacation to my family's house, etc. And I, it was mainly so that we could have time apart, so we can, you know, have that, you know how they say distance makes the heart grow fonder.
Yeah.
I definitely do believe that, because it makes you just put things into perspective and realize like you're now seeing things from a like a bird's eye view or a different perspective, you know, a fresh
Mm,
you're in a different environment and now you're thinking over like, okay, what
mm,
you know, what did he do, what did I do? And then you kind of realize that actually in the end you're both just trying to, you know, make this thing work. And you're, yeah, there are going to be, you know, obstacles and differences and everything, but as long as you're
mm,
both trying to make it work, and that's what
yeah.
matters. So yeah,
I
time
think,
apart definitely helped
yeah, I
to
think time
allow
apart
it.
definitely. Yeah, I agree with you that like you do need space from each other, and I do agree that distance does make the hearts grow fonder. But at the same time, too much distance. This is again my
Yeah,
experience. Everyone's experiences are different. But with me, too much distance also makes the hearts grow further apart, because you're away from each other for so long that you're kind of like just living two different lives. And because
yeah,
I've done long distance a few times, and by long distance I mean like separations of 4 or 5 months, and I know
mm.
that that even takes a toll on a marriage. So I think just
Yeah, so
knowing that
that's
enough distance
just
to be able to
having,
appreciate the person.
yeah, exactly, just having that balance where it's not too little where you haven't even like, you know, missed that person, or not
Yeah,
too
yeah,
much where now, like you said, it's becoming an issue of like now you just start to live separate lives anyways, and then you're just like, okay, this is a new normal. So yeah.
yeah.
So, you know, touching upon, we mentioned about the finances. So you were saying how, you know, Islamically, it's not necessarily for the joint, for the joint finances to take place. So I just wanted
Hmm.
to talk about a little bit about that, because maybe sometimes I feel like, especially if the woman is also working, um,
Hmm.
she might feel pressured to like contribute, or, you
Hmm.
know, the husband is like, well, I'm letting you work, so you know, technically he might,
Yeah,
what's the
it's a
word,
tough
like
one.
emotionally blackmail her into, you know, giving.
Yeah, and it's common. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Mm,
yeah,
yeah.
that's why that's why I just wanted to point out that Islamically there's no such thing as that. Like if the man, you know, it's upon the man's shoulders to provide for the family, and if he is unable to do that, then he can maybe have an amicable agreement with his wife if they want to join, have let's say a separate account where they both put in something, you know what I mean, towards, let's say, the bills and stuff. But as for like having a completely shared account where everything, like her savings and everything, is joined with his, is just it creates a lot of complications when things go sour.
Yeah, I do. I just, you know what? I just so disagree with this whole joint bank account thing because, like, then look, as a man, yes, he has to provide and everything, and as long as he's giving you your nafaqa and stuff like that, at the end of the day, it's between him and Allah. And if he's being stingy, it's between him and Allah at the end of the day. So if he wants to
Yeah.
lie about finances or lie about things being tough and all of that, you know what? He's lying to Allah ultimately. So, and how can you lie to the being that created you? So I just feel that if you're going to behave like that, then that's between you and God. But like with this whole joint finances thing, for me, it just doesn't work because I've had my own money since I was so young that I'm not willing to. I don't believe in this whole sharing business because it does cause issues later on. Sometimes things are rosy for like 20 years, and 20 years down the line, there are issues. And like, you're making issues over like you spent this and you spent that, and then you're arguing over finances when if from the beginning you had agreed that, look, he is going to be the provider because that's his job, that's his God-given duty. He's going to give you the nafaqa that he can afford. So like sometimes what happens is at the beginning of the marriage, he can't afford so much. But then later on, he's so used to giving you so little. And this is very common. It's such a common problem that 5 years, 10 years down the line, Allah has given him. And he's just still being just a bakhil. Like, astaghfirullah.
Yeah.
It's not a nice thing to say, but like, like what's going on? Like, you always want to talk about your rights and stuff. Well, they're here. Like, and I feel also like both with women changing, with women working and stuff like that, it's definitely changed the dynamics of many marriages globally. Because
Yeah.
now men are like, ah, so what? She makes her own money. And like they forget that it's still a God-given duty and it's still a God-given obligation.
Yeah.
So it really is a
Yeah.
tough
And then
one. But like,
and see, the thing is, women, because they now have their own financial freedom, it's like before, people were more bound to stick in a marriage because they had that financial security from the man.
yeah,
Whereas
yes,
nowadays,
yes,
it's like the woman is less willing to put up with anything because she now has her own financial freedom, and she's like, well, I can live on my own anyways. So
mm,
I think in that sense, it's important to remind ourselves that it's not necessarily, we're not living in a marriage because we depend on one another. We're living in a marriage,
yeah.
meaning we're having this, union because we are, connecting, and what's the word? We're not
Acting upon a
dependent.
sunnah also. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. But I was gonna say that it's not because you're dependent, but it's because you want that companionship, I guess. You know what I mean? That
yeah.
companionship, in life in general.
Mm,
um
mm,
and yeah, like you said, acting upon a sunnah, and also we just mentioned about bringing children, um and stuff like that. So there are, it's not just about, oh, I'm dependent on
yeah,
this person, hence why I have to stick with
yeah,
them, you know what
yeah.
I
But
mean?
how do you feel about a woman being financially stable before she gets married? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, before she gets married.
Or like
uh
even, yeah,
yeah, I mean, of course, there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, in fact, if the woman has the opportunity, let's say, to work in a Islamic environment, where she's not compromising on her religion, then I mean, no doubt, why should anyone have a problem with it? You know what I mean?
mm,
As
mm,
long as she's, obviously, for example, if a woman's living with her parents, this is before like she gets married and everything, then of course, as long as she's giving them their uh, rights and stuff, and she's being dutiful towards them. Because see, what happens is that a lot of the times when women, I mean, I have nothing against women working, and me personally, I do things as well, like I also teach and stuff, so I'm not like 100% a housewife as such. But I would say that sometimes when women work and stuff, they kind of get it in their heads that they're a bit too, um, what's the word? They're a bit too independent, and they can manage it. They pay the bills and stuff like that. And then
Mm.
what happens is that they and also the whole, like, just working in itself, of course, it saps from your energy as well. You know what I mean? So when
Yeah,
you
you
come back
reach burnout.
home, yeah. So when you come back
Mm.
home, then you can't perform to optimum level, in terms of just the basics of running a household. Sometimes it just,
Mm.
and that's where I feel that is even more important and critical for both the spouses to be of like of the same like level of understanding and thinking, where they're able to selflessly, for example, allow that person to maybe let some things go. You know what I mean?
Mm. Mm. Mm.
So yeah,
Yeah.
because ultimately we can't, I mean, we can try to do everything, but we really can't. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. We're not built to do everything. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm. I agree. I agree with you. Because what happens is when you're working full time, you are unable to do everything at home. And what is going to happen is you are going to end up reaching burnout. And like you'll see people that do work full time and they bring up their children and they do all of these things, right? But there's definitely things that you don't see behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And it's definitely like, sometimes women, they reach burnout 10 years later, but they definitely get there.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
definitely believe like, yeah, yeah, I definitely think it's important to understand that. Also, I think like in terms of spending as well, I think some women, they're just so used to spending a lot of money. So
Mm.
what ends up happening is because their husband is unable to kind of keep up with that kind of expense, they have no choice but then to carry on working. So,
Yeah.
like, there as well, I think, what do you have to say
You know
about
what?
that? Because that's also a tough one.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. That's why Islam, when it talks about compatibility, you know, um,
Mm.
it's not necessarily only compatibility in the sense that, you're from the same, background in terms of, culture and that, but also in terms of, financial thing is also
Yeah,
important to be compatible on that.
something that you're supposed to look at. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm.
because a lot of the times people assume that, oh no, he's, mind you, nowadays a lot of women are looking for wealthy men. I don't know, do you see that as a norm? Because I definitely feel
I
like
think
for
so. Yeah, they
example,
are looking for someone financially stable. So,
yeah, they're meaning, and they're looking for like quite highly educated men who
yeah.
have
Mm.
financial stability and everything. And yeah, I mean, that is to a degree depends on how you are as a person. So if you feel like,
Mm.
I am a person who likes my shopping, I like, to get my clothes every month or whatever it is that your habits are, you need to be aware of, the status of your husband's
Yeah.
provisions as well.
Yeah. Also, I think what it is as well is that times have changed so much as well. So, like, just say like a century ago or 2 centuries ago, things like getting your hair done or like having a facial done or whatever, it was amongst the tribe. So like the women were doing it for each other for free and stuff like that. Whereas now we live in a world of consumerism, and
Yeah,
it's like if you do want to get your hair done, for instance, or you do feel like going for a facial or a massage or something, just um small things that you enjoy doing, you've now got to pay for them because the
yeah.
world has changed. So, like, in that regards, like, things have become a bit more expensive globally. And then, like, unfortunately, like, a lot of households, they just can't survive on a one man's income, basically.
Yeah, yeah, there are a lot of, I mean, sometimes the woman needs to work, for example, for like just basic necessity, like the bills just can't be paid or just
Yeah,
solely off the
yeah,
man's
yeah,
income
yeah,
and stuff. But then
yeah, yeah.
but then there's another criteria, which is now these extra
Mm,
accommodating for all these extra things in the marriage, like you
yeah,
said, the facials
yeah,
or
yeah,
the hair or
yeah,
this or
yeah,
that,
yeah.
or like going out to
Mm,
eat and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, that's when a lot of women, they start working and they're like, oh well, I'm like doing it because I need all these extra, things in my
Mm,
life,
mm,
which they're okay to pay for it on their own, like from their own
yeah.
pockets.
Mm,
Would you
yeah.
think
You know,
that, for example, you said that you had, financial stability before getting married as well. So would you say that, for example, when you got married, was it difficult, or was it, what did it not matter to you, about, like, for example, asking your husband for some financial, for something financially,
mm,
when you know that you have the funds to
yeah.
provide for it?
Yeah, so like, this is definitely something that I've struggled with, and a lot of women, like, I always hear this, oh, I have my own money anyway, so I'm not gonna depend on my husband for it and stuff. Like, I was just speaking the other day to a newly married woman, and she was like, oh no, but I'm not gonna ask my husband for money because, like, I have my own money, and I have my own
Yeah,
finances and this and that. But do you know what? There is going to come a stage in your life when you are going to stop working, and all of a sudden, you're going to need X amount of money, and your husband's going to be like, hang on a second, what was going on all these years? And they're not
yeah,
going to be used to giving you that money, and it is going to cause an explosion. And I can
yeah,
almost guarantee that it is, because I've heard of so many stories where people are married for like 5, 6 years and finances don't matter, because she's like, oh, so what? I make my own money, you know?
yeah,
And then there comes a point where now she's finding it really, really tough because now she's had a child. She's now, she's the one that's now the full-time homemaker and whatever. And the man is like, it's not even that he can't afford, he's just,
used
sometimes
to
I
it.
feel like, yeah, they're just used to it. They've just become so enabled. And like, there's actually been cases where the girl feels like, why should I have to ask? Does he not have the common sense to tell me? And personally, I feel that men do have the common sense, and they just choose to behave a bit ignorant sometimes, because, like, I've heard and seen firsthand where men are really giving with
Yeah,
finances, but then with their wife, they're just so uptight and just like, you know, I just feel like from the beginning, you need to like make it clear that, hey, I want an allowance. And like, if you buy something which is supposed to be provided for by him, from the beginning, you've got to have the guts to say, hey, you need to reimburse me for this. Like,
yeah,
it's hard. I never did it until
yeah,
today. It's something I really struggle with. But I think that you need to be able to, because what's going to happen is 10 years down the line, 5 years down the line, you're going to end up having this built up resentment where you
mm,
feel like, oh my God, I'm paying for all of this and I'm doing more than my part.
yeah, yeah.
So,
I think
yeah,
especially,
I think,
I think especially those who, for example, they have financial stability, the women, but their husband may be like not that well off, and they just about, getting in the basic income. I think they kind of feel, quite guilty for that. Because I know for me personally, although I wasn't really working in that, but I did have, of course, my own savings in that. And like my husband, was a student, and I don't know if he had savings and whatever, but I kind of did feel, sorry for him. You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah, of
And
course you do.
yeah, but
Yeah,
having said that, I quickly realized that if I'm going to keep doing this, he's going to get used to it, and it's not going to
yeah.
be, something that's going to be serving me in the future. You know what I mean?
No,
So
and
you have to think
and
long
the
term.
longer it carries on, the harder it's gonna get. And do you know, sometimes like I'll be having, like, just the other day I was talking to this newly married woman. She's been married like what, 1 month, I think. And she's like, and I'm trying to explain to her that no, but it's your right. Like, he should provide for you and stuff. And she's like, no, no, but she was just so adamant that like she does not want her husband to pay for anything of hers. And that mentality, like, it's changed over the years, and we need to change it back. You see, some things should be there to stay. And these are things like a man being the breadwinner and providing. Like, I think
Yeah,
that's an Islamic thing. And I believe Islam is so perfect. And he should be the one, especially if he's able to. And, of course, he knows best if he's able to. It's between him and God. But especially if he's able to, you shouldn't feel that, like, oh, I have to spend my own money and I shouldn't have to ask for him and ask from
yeah,
him and things like that. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, well, if the
Mm.
woman, for example, if the woman happily does it, from the goodness of her heart, then of course she's going to be rewarded for it, and it's a good act,
Yeah, of course.
and
Mm.
she can continue. But here we're talking about if a woman, she she doesn't say it only because she's doesn't have the guts, you know what I mean, or she
Mm.
feels
Mm.
bad for the man, but in reality,
Yeah.
she's like, oh, he should
Mm.
be providing. Yeah.
Yeah.
One last thing on finances. Do you think that uh, your husband should know how much you have? Is it
Oh,
something that?
absolutely not. Look,
Mm,
I'm not saying that they like, look, every marriage is different, but I feel like if they know how much you have, I don't know, I just feel like it's just not their business. Like, it's for me, it's also like the whole Islam thing comes in here to play, where Islamically, if they don't need to know, then why should you have to tell them? Like, that's more of like a cultural thing. And
yeah.
that's not to say like you hide how much you make and what
Mm,
exactly, you know, but like men also, they don't tell their wives exactly what they make and exactly how much they have. Like, yeah, they might claim they do, and like, yeah,
yeah.
you might have an overall idea and an estimate, but I think that here the freedom comes in. Like, you need to be able to trust each other enough to have that freedom of like, your spouse doesn't need to know exactly how much you make.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't know, like, I'm sure there'll be people that are going to disagree with me here, but this is my opinion, and
Yeah, no,
I
I
stick to it
agree
for
with
now.
that actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. But I'm trying to think of maybe other women who feel like, oh, it's like as if, maybe I'm hiding something, you know what I mean? And they just want to
Mm, mm.
lay it all out in the open. But then what they don't realize is that number one, is not none of their concern anyways. Number two is that you know, it might be used against you, you know what I mean, in anything.
Yeah, yeah, I think what we always need to remember is that who we've married is human at the end of the day. And
Yeah.
like, shaitan is always there, trying to like just pick and pick and pick, and he comes knocking, and he tries to make things worse than they seem, and like, you don't need that. So it's just better to kind of avoid all of it from the beginning, I feel.
Yeah. Yeah. And also another thing, this is now moving on from the finances, is
Hmm.
you know g- another quality to have is communication. And when I say communication, I
Mm,
just don't mean any kind of communication, but effective communication where listening and understanding and speaking and everything takes place in that setting, you know what I mean, where it's not just
yeah.
one person or saying their perspective and the other person just listening, but it's a healthy discussion that can take place.
Mm.
I feel like that's really
So
important. If
respectfully,
Yeah,
yeah. I
respectful
yeah.
communication.
Yeah, I always, whenever anyone says, I've heard people say all the time that, oh, communication is so important in a marriage. I always put my tuppence in, and I'm always like, respectful communication is so important in a marriage, because you can communicate, you can bang pots and pans and scream and shout at each other. That's not going to be effective. But like,
Yeah,
if you're going to respectfully communicate and you're going to listen to the other person, to actually listen and not answer back, and
yeah,
like you said, to be understanding and to actually have a healthy conversation or a healthy discussion or a healthy debate, that's, yeah, that's important.
yeah, yeah. And another thing is, you know, overlooking and forgiving in a way, because for example, you're bound to make mistakes, and you're bound to hurt the other person. It might not be intentional, but it will happen, right? Um,
Mm, mm,
whether you are the one hurting or you're being the one hurt, you know what I mean? It's gonna happen.
mm,
Um,
mm,
but just overlooking it, I think, is really important, because you see, what people like to do is, subconsciously they keep score of things. So, oh yeah,
yeah.
this happened and that happened. But what
Mm,
happens is that it builds up, and then you'll find yourself reacting to something that just deserves a small reaction, and you just end up blowing your top because you're just like, all this is building up in your head. So
mm.
and remember, I don't just mean like just brushing it aside and moving on. No, try and communicate it like get with your husband in a respectful manner and etc. Then once that's over, don't hold that against him
Yeah,
now in the
it's
future.
sorted out now. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I
And
think
if you need
definitely
to,
bringing up things from the past is so
yeah,
detrimental.
yeah,
Like you said your sorries, you've said you're going to improve and you're going to try and work at things, and then like you have another argument that has doesn't even really have anything to do with the previous issue that happened like 3 months ago or 6 months ago or 2 weeks ago. It's something completely different, and then you bring that up. I think it's so unhealthy, and it really is. You don't realize how detrimental it can be to your relationship, because
yeah.
it really does affect it negatively.
Yeah, definitely. And if you need to, for
Mm.
example, if you need to like journal about it or something, it's better than talking to somebody else, like we mentioned earlier, because as tempting as that is,
Mm.
not everyone is gonna, be quick to forget about it, move on. You know what I mean? And people will
Mm.
still hold that inside
Especially,
them.
yeah, now that you mentioned that, even before when you mentioned it, I wanted to actually mention this, and that is that sometimes we think going to our mum and dad is like, that's the thing, like we trust our mum and dad the most, so we go to our mum and dad for our marital issues. And
Yeah,
you know what? Unless you need them to really mediate between something that's really, really serious, I think you need to really consider whether or not this thing is worth going to your parents about. Because do you know what? Look, I don't know how it works for you, but with me, if I was to go to my mom and dad, immediately, my husband would be the bad guy, because like I'm the apple of their eye. Like, why did
yeah,
he do that to my daughter? And they're just gonna start like disliking him when you've like kissed and made up. So
yeah,
you've got to be really careful who you take advice from. I mean, who you decide to confide in. And like you said, journaling. We've got phones now, and you can write in your notes. Your notes can be password protected. Do that. Like write things down. And when you write things down in your notes, it gives you so much clarity. And
yeah,
sometimes when you go back, you'll think, okay, maybe I overreacted. Maybe
yeah,
I was like just being a bit dramatic. And it's so important to just kind of like talk to yourself, if that makes sense.
yeah,
Talk to yourself and make
yeah,
yourself see sense. Yeah,
yeah. And
yeah.
if you need to go to somebody or speak to somebody about it, then think of the person who is going to be as just as possible and look at it objectively, as opposed to
Mm,
taking sides. Because
yeah,
what it is, the reason why I went to like my dad, for example, is because he was the one that was recommending my husband in the first place, and he was the one who really
yeah.
praised him and really like
Mm,
wanted, like really basically made him look really good. So in my head, I felt like my dad really obviously liked my husband, and of course he likes me as his daughter. So he's hopefully going to take a neutral position, and he actually did. You know what I mean? So that's why it helped.
alhamdulillah.
Yeah,
Mm, mm, mm.
alhamdulillah. So yeah, now that brings us to the topic of in-laws. And
Yeah.
basically, you said how in the beginning you were living on your own, right? So you had that as a
Hmm.
stipulation.
Hmm.
So did that remain the whole way, or did that change? And
Yeah. Okay, so here, like, okay, so like if you remember in the first episode, I was saying to you, like, I stood my ground, and I was even judged for like being a bad influence, because I was like, no, if I get married, like, I want my own space and whatever. But now, after everything that, like, the way things have panned out in my life, if I was now to give advice to somebody, this is me evolving now. If
yeah,
now to give advice to somebody, I would actually say to them that, look, it is a preference to want to live on your own, but like, don't don't say no to a guy just because he's not going to be able to provide that for you. And the reason why I say that is because I think about 3 years into my marriage, due to unforeseen circumstances that none of us expected, nobody in the family did, we had to actually move out of our apartment. And it was a huge shock, I think, a trauma for both of us, because it happened so quickly. It didn't happen within a matter of days. It happened within a matter of hours. Within hours,
Mm.
I was like, moving in with my in-laws. And like I said, it was a traumatic time for both of us, and we had all these emotions that we had to kind of navigate through. But then at the same time, because like we had been married for so long, we kind of knew how to treat each other when like things are going tough and things like that. And yes, despite it not being the ideal living arrangement, I do
Mm.
actually live with my in-laws now, and we make it work. And yeah, it's not always as easy and it's not always as ideal, but alhamdulillah, the general, I'd say overall, it's still okay. It's not like, oh my God, I'm gonna die. Like, oh my God, I don't know how I'm gonna survive. Oh, I need to
Yeah.
leave him. Like, it's not that bad.
Yeah. Well, do you know what? Here's the thing, right? So you said that they shouldn't refuse the man, based on the fact that obviously he can't provide his own. Um, to an extent, okay, I agree.
Mhm.
Yeah, definitely. If the man, for example, fits like majority of the criteria, and let's say maybe the only thing that's lacking is that he's living with his parents and he's not willing to move out. The thing is, I would weigh up, like I wouldn't just blindly say, okay, this man has everything ticked and now there's this one thing, and I shouldn't refuse. I think I should like actually find out, okay, how are his parents like, and find out more about that. um
So then, yeah, so then that takes
yeah,
us back to the first episode where I said that if the living arrangements are going to be such that you're living with in-laws, then you
yeah.
shouldn't just have a meeting with the husband. You
Oh,
should
yeah, yeah,
actually have a meeting with the mother-in-law and the father-in-law and whoever else is living in that home. And that's
yeah,
something that doesn't happen, and I think it needs to start happening.
yeah, yeah.
Mm,
But see, here's the thing, right? So what I have found, is that people, for example, they get married and they're told that, oh yeah, living arrangements will be separate and everything, but obviously nothing's concrete. So when the woman gets married, then she lives with her in-laws. But see, the thing is, each in-laws, of course, they differ, right?
mhm,
And
mhm,
the whole circumstance is unique. But there are, like, for example, cases where I've heard, like, it just the in-laws are just so difficult, because remember, the in-laws, the parents, they come from a different generation, right? Both like
mm,
your parents and the man's parents. So
mm.
it's like that, you know in that, what's it called, just their presence, and maybe some like interactions that happen, it kind of like really turns the relationship sour. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
now
yeah.
this woman
Mm,
is feeling like, well, this man is, nice and everything, but he doesn't want to leave his parents, and his parents are really making our life harder for us.
mm,
So what does she do then in that circumstance?
mm. I think each situation is different. But like you see, it's not, this isn't like, you can't give a black and white answer for this. You
Yeah,
can't
yeah,
say like, oh, you do this. I think it depends on the context of everything. So like, are her family understanding and accommodating? Is she able to go back to her family and say, look, listen, he promised me this and he's unable to fulfill this promise. I need you guys to help here now. Or like the middleman trying to get him involved, or just really sitting down with the guy and saying to him, look, listen, I cannot live like this. If you want me to live like this, then we need to all sit down at the table or somewhere, and we need to lay everything out on the table, and we need things to be clear. We need things to be crystal clear. And like just having some sort of a routine. um I don't know, even if it means that you're going to have turns, as silly and as ridiculous as it sounds. um I obviously I live in a joint household now, and we do have turns in things that we do, and like it's really made things so much easier because things are now in black and white. So it's not like, oh, she wakes up one day, no one's going to say, oh, she didn't even cook. The thing is, she didn't even know that she should have cooked or shouldn't have cooked. There was no proper communication. So if she's going to have to live in that kind of an environment, and you want her to live with your parents, then you've got to be man enough. And here I just feel men are just not man enough anymore. They're unable to
mm,
sit down at the table and say, look, mom, dad, and then any other siblings that they're living with, brothers and sisters. Sometimes what happens is like the husband is the eldest and they've got all these younger brothers and sisters, and the wife is expected to just clean up after them like she's their mum or something, you know.
Yeah.
And like
You know,
to be
someone actually told me before someone actually told me before I got married that, oh, you know, if your husband's the eldest, then you as a
Mhm,
daughter-in-law is going to have it even harder. Because and then at the time I
mhm,
didn't quite understand it, but I think now that I'm
mhm,
married I kind of get it, because technically
mhm,
you are coming, like they've never ever dealt with you know, a daughter-in-law, and it's both of your first times, you know what I mean? So you don't have like a benchmark, and then you kind of unsure, okay, you know, where is my position in this? And like you said, you know, sometimes the daughter-in-law is then expected to you know, also clean up after the other siblings, and it just becomes
mhm.
this like this whole mess. And she is like the first one to set the trend, if you like. So the next daughter-in-law,
Yeah.
if there is another one to come, then she's going to
Mm.
be basically either thanking you or you know,
Yeah.
not like, or either cursing you, because
Yeah.
she's be like, you know,
Yeah.
either you make it easier for her or harder for her. So
Mm.
that is where I feel like boundaries really come into play. Like they
Yeah.
definitely within marriage of just a husband and wife, they should be, you know, boundaries in terms of, like we discussed, you know, financial boundaries and other boundaries, you know, that should
Mm.
be discussed
Mm.
between the two spouses. But definitely within the you know, the extended family, the in-laws, etc., there definitely needs to be
Boundaries.
clear boundaries. And the thing is that
Mm.
if see, with me, I, you know, entered the marriage and I didn't even have any education on anything. Like I already told you,
Mm.
I didn't read much or anything.
Mm.
So
Mm.
for me, you know, I didn't even have this idea of me having boundaries, because in my head I was like, you know, all this because I had heard just so much negativity in terms of like in-laws and stuff, meaning people complaining that, oh yeah, in-laws are, you know, really hard to deal with and stuff. In my head I was just like, I'm going to make that different. For me, I'm going to
Yeah.
be like
Mm.
my mother-in-law's best friend, and you know, we're going to have like, it's going to be all good. And because, you know, they don't have any daughters and stuff, it's going to be all good and everything. So I didn't know anything about like boundaries and all that, because, you know, we're not educated on these things from an early age. But after things go pear-shaped, you realize, oh my gosh, if only I had made it clear in the beginning that
Mm.
I wasn't going to do this, or what I can do this. You know what I mean?
Mm. Mm. You see, like there's disadvantages and advantages to it, right? Because I did have boundaries from the very beginning. I did
Is
have
it?
boundaries, and until today, I do have boundaries. And do you know what? Your persona then is described as, okay, it's not that I'm the bad guy, but like I do have a bit of a rapport, like of being someone that's like quite strong-headed. Strong-headed is a nice word that I'm describing myself as, but like I've been described as not so nice words because I've had
Mm.
boundaries. So like now, if you're going to be the kind of person that is going to have boundaries from the beginning, you've got to be okay with people not really liking you. You've got to be able to um you've got to, like, are you going to lose sleep over it at night? Like, I don't lose sleep over someone disliking me. As long as I haven't done anything wrong to them and my conscience is clear, I'm fine. But like it takes a certain type of heart and a certain type of strength to have boundaries from the beginning as well. But then,
Yeah.
having said that, like, you know what? First impressions, they last. First impressions are forever. So now, yes, I did have boundaries at the beginning, but had I done a few things differently, maybe I wouldn't be labeled or titled as the kind of person that I am today. So not not that I'm labeled as like a really bad daughter-in-law or anything like that. No, alhamdulillah, like we all have like a decent relationship. But like there are certain things where, because that was the first impression, it's no matter what I do to try and change that, it's not going to change that.
Mm.
So I think like it just depends. Like, yes, have boundaries, but maybe like don't be as stubborn as I was. I don't know.
Yeah. You did bring up a good point about impressions lasting. But you know what? I personally do feel like, okay, maybe impressions are important. However, meaning first impressions. However, if a person's behavior changes, right,
Mm-hmm.
there is scope for, that impression to fade away. You know what I mean?
Maybe.
Because
But then, like,
here's the thing, right? Here's the thing. I'm the type of person where I prefer to know the person for, who they are. Like, show me your true colors. Like, even if it's
face
the
value.
worst impression that I get, I'd rather have that, out in the forefront than, having all this niceness and this, facade of all this kindness in the beginning, and then
Mm-hmm.
later on, the real side comes out. Or I wouldn't necessarily say it's the real side, but with, I guess, with just living together and stuff like that, a person's weaknesses come out more. And
Definitely.
there's a clash. And then you kind of feel betrayed, because you feel like, oh well, this is the impression that I got, and this is the
Mm-hmm.
impression that they gave me, and now look where it is. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, like, it's a tough one. You know what I mean? See, here's the thing, right? Um, so not all the time is it the fact that, the for example, the mother-in-law, the father-in-law is the problem. Maybe it's the daughter-in-law. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There is, um,
Mm-hmm.
there are times when you yourself as a person, you're quite a difficult person, and that's where you have to really be honest with yourself, and realize that me just having my ego, fed all the time by being right, or meaning supposedly looking like the one being
Yeah.
right, and it's not going to help the situation. You have to be
Yeah.
somewhat understanding. I feel
Mm.
like, here's the thing. I once, someone told me that basically, you should try and win over your in-laws by, you can, one way of doing it is by giving gifts and stuff. What do you say about that?
I agree 100% in the sense that, look, if you remember, like just previously, I was telling you that like I'm not the best person in the kitchen, and it's no secret. But like I do buy presents, and like I just love buying presents for people anyway, not just my in-laws. So like it's not really just doing it for them, it's just doing it for anyone that I love. Like I just love spoiling people that I love. So that's my way of showing them that I do love and appreciate them, because when I think about all my in-laws, every single one of them plays a part in my life, and I can't really imagine my life without them now, because we do have a healthy relationship. And that's not to say that we don't have disagreements. Of course we do. I'm not the kind of person to take things lying down, so sometimes I disagree with the elders as well. But when all is said and done, like we still have like this, we know that like we're family basically. And I think having that, to be able to have that your in-laws are your family. I know obviously with you, of course it is your family, but like to really accept them as your family, like I think that's something that's really really hard, but like with time I do feel that you can have a relationship like that.
See, here's the thing, right? Because um how you behave, in especially, in the beginning and stuff, it kind of sets the tone. So like you said about
Mm-hmm.
first impressions, but also it's like, okay, so for example, if you give them, of course, in the beginning it's natural, to give gifts and stuff like that. But then it kind of becomes like an expectation that maybe.
But the gifts don't have to be big, and they don't have to be frequent. Like sometimes I go on holiday and I get presents for everyone, sometimes I go on holiday and I don't.
Yeah.
um Sometimes I go to the shops and I don't know, I see something that I know everyone's going to really like, so then I'll get like, I just feel like gifts don't have to be exactly the same every single time. Like again, I think with us it's just a difference of opinion. But
No, I don't
yeah,
disagree with the gifts part. I'm just saying that
yeah,
there are
yeah,
some cases where then it becomes like, a sort of like an expectation. Or, and then if the one time, like for example, she doesn't give a gift or whatever, and then it's like, oh, a big deal. When in reality, I guess you could say
yeah,
that not
yeah,
only with gifts, but with everything in general. Like for example,
yeah,
if you're
yeah, yeah.
used to, serving in a certain way, and now, you don't have that capacity to do so, then it's kind of like, oh, well, she used to do it all this time. Now what happened? You know what I mean?
Mm. Yeah, I
Um,
think over here you
yeah,
shouldn't even feel guilty about it. Um, the fact that they're feeling like that says a lot about them than it does about you.
yeah. So maybe I'd say like in order to avoid that, maybe not all the time, but maybe like once in a while.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Mm.
Yeah. And another thing that I wanted to ask you is that do you because I know that what tends to happen is that when the woman gets married, it's like, okay, now her husband's parents are like, have somehow become like her parents, and then she's expected to, let's say, call them, mom or dad, and
Mm.
that I don't know, what would you say to that? Like, is it something that, you know is it something necessary in order to break that the ice, you know what I mean? Because remember, this woman is an outsider technically. She's coming into the
Mm.
family, so
Yeah,
would it help
yeah.
to
You know
do
what?
that, or
Again, like, I don't know if I'm the right person to give to like, my opinion is going to be a bit maybe controversial, but I don't think so. Why should you be made to call your mother-in-law mum? Like, why can't you just say like khalati or khala, or I don't know, whatever
auntie?
it is in your language, auntie? Why do you have to call her mum? But having said that, like, in my relationship, my husband did request that I call his mum, which is fine. But like, we have this thing where, okay, that's fine. If you want to call, if I'm now gonna call your mum, you can call my mum too. It's as simple as that. Like,
Mm,
and what I really loved about this was that my sisters-in-law are the same. So like, with them, their husbands, they are expected to call their mother-in-law mum, but at the same time, they also, their husbands also call their mum's mum. So like, it's a two-way street. And
yeah,
with things like this, we say that, oh, it's not tit for tat, it's not tit for tat, but there are certain things that really are just going to be tit for tat, and it is going to affect you. And for me,
yeah,
that's one of those things. Like, my mother-in-law is not my mum, but I'm expected to call her mum. So then my mum is also not your mum, but I expect you to call her mum. Like,
yeah,
there's no really Islamic guidance on this, so it depends on the culture as well.
yeah, yeah,
I mean, in some cultures, you just call them by their first name. That's very common in
yeah,
the UK among the Caucasian community, which is
yeah,
also quite nice. I think it just depends on the culture and what is. But again, it depends from the beginning, what you did from the beginning, what you called
yeah.
them from the beginning.
I think, for a tip for sisters maybe is to maybe ask their in-laws, like, oh, what would you like me to call you, if they are
Yeah,
open to,
yeah,
going with that.
yeah,
Because you see, with me,
definitely.
because my in-laws are basically my family, my aunt and my uncle. So, I've always been used to that, but I didn't know that it was actually being expected of me to, call them mom and whatever, mom and dad. And for me, you see,
But
the
do
thing is
you?
that, yeah, well, now, of course, because when it came to my attention that it was expected of me, so
Hmm.
that's when I was like, oh, okay. But having said that, I do feel like, the it should come from both ways, understanding. Because, see, the thing is that it's not very fair on, like, for the in-laws to, expect that, oh yeah, now she should call me this because, she's
Mm,
married to my son, kind of thing. And
mm,
likewise, it's not always fair that, the the daughter-in-law doesn't take into consideration, what they'd like. So I think it has
mm.
to be an agreement, and
Yeah.
not necessarily like just projecting your expectation and going sour if that doesn't go that way. You know what I mean?
Mm, mm, mm.
Because for me
Yeah.
personally, I feel like, you know, in life you're given one mom and one dad, and
Mm,
it's quite a, for me anyways, it's quite a sentimental, personal thing. You know what I mean? Like, I know
same.
there are
Mm,
people who are very, open, and they're very carefree to call anyone, oh yeah, mom and this and that. Whereas for me, it's very difficult. And in the beginning, I really had to adjust because it just
mm,
didn't come to my tongue naturally. Like,
Yeah.
You know,
But
I
even
just couldn't
now,
fathom.
would you say it
Because for
comes
me,
naturally?
um, even now, to be honest, not really. Like
Exactly.
I will throw it in a sentence here there, but it won't necessarily be like my, you know, at the forefront all the time. You know what I mean?
Mm, mm,
And yeah, because for me, like I don't know, the way I see it is, like I said, it's very sentimental, and a mom is somebody who, you know, changed my nappies and like was there for me from day one. You know what I mean?
yeah,
So
yeah.
um and what's interesting is that I don't, and because I feel that way, I don't even expect my husband to call my mom, even though
Mm,
I do call his mom. But I don't expect it from him, and I don't even, you know, ask of him to do that because, see, I'm understanding in that sense that, you know, I myself don't prefer it, so I don't want to put it on
mm,
somebody else. You know what I mean?
mm, mm. So, like, you say that, like, it's the same with me. Whilst I don't prefer to do it, it's not something that I've enforced upon my husband. But like, I made it clear at the beginning, and but that doesn't mean that I expect him to now. Like, there are times where he just says auntie or whatever. I don't even know. But like, to put it out there, like, I just think for me it's more about like just putting things out there. Like, if I'm expected to do something, why is it only that
Yeah,
it's expected of me,
that's a,
especially?
yeah, that's a prime example of, you know, having your boundary and being clear about it.
Yeah. Mm,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, you know, I was going to say something, and that's when it comes to, for example, daughter-in-law and mother-in-law, each one has their expectations, right,
Hmm.
of each
Hmm.
other.
Yes.
And, you know, what was like for me personally, what was a learning curve is that sometimes that expectation isn't communicated, and therefore it's kind of like, you know, things go sour when you don't perform to that level, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah, because they're not communicated.
Yes. And from like, as for example, because we're advising the sister, so from a daughter-in-law's perspective, what advice like would you do you have for you know, when expectations aren't communicated but then things go sour when they're not being met?
Mm, yeah. I think to be I think just to have the guts to sit down with whoever it is in the family that things have gone pear-shaped with and say to them, look, what exactly have I done wrong in your eyes? I want to understand why you're upset with me. And then moving on from there and saying, okay, so what do you want from me? And then taking it from there. So sometimes that person might say something like, oh, um, okay, this is something very, very common, where girls that come into the family are just expected to get on with it. They're just expected to do things and nothing is given to them. Like, nothing is, they haven't been explained anything. They're just expected to just get on with things. The
Yeah.
thing is, how do you know how things are supposed to be done? Every household is different. So now to when you're discussing this, to actually say, look, what duties do you exactly want me to do? And then, like, if for example they want you to do something a certain way, and if that way, I don't know, like there's 5 ways of vacuuming, for example. If they want you to vacuum a certain way and it's not going to take anything out of your time, and it's something like that you feel that you are able to accommodate, then for you to be like, okay, I'll do it your way. And
Mm.
also to be open minded enough to understand that your in law's way is sometimes actually such a good way. And if anything, you can learn from it.
Yeah.
Um, and again, like, I think just being able to have the guts to have that conversation, because do you know what it is as well? Generally, women, they're not confrontational at all.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
I think the only reason why I am the way I am is because I was brought up in a male dominated background, not just in terms of siblings, but even in terms of relatives and uncles and all of that. Like, I just have one auntie, both sides, like my father's side and my mother's side. Like, it's just mostly men. And because I'm so used to seeing the guys like just at each other or having their arguments and then just getting over it, or just being exposed to that, I am also like that, where I'm just like, right, let's talk about it. Like, like, in fact, my husband says I'm too confrontational, which I've really calmed down now. But like, I just want things to be clear in black and white. Like, even if someone's trying to explain something to me, or I feel someone's beating around the bush, I will then say, are you trying to say this, or are you trying to imply this, or is this what you want? Because I don't want any of this hinting business, and it doesn't work for me. In fact, so many times something has been hinted towards me and I haven't understood. Like, I genuinely haven't understood. And then it's been taken negatively because I didn't get the sign, So
Yeah.
I just think communication, again, just how you need to respectfully communicate your issues with your husband, you now need to respectfully communicate your issues with your in-laws, whoever it is that you're living with, whether it's his siblings, his mum, his dad, his grandparents, whoever it is in the house.
Yeah. 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 It's definitely something
What
that
do you have to
we
say
need to
about
learn.
that?
I would definitely agree to that, and to an extent, I am I do actually practice that to an extent. Um, there are times when I kind of feel like um, I don't know. I kind of feel like, oh, maybe if I have a confrontation about this, it won't be forgotten. You know what I mean? And
Yeah. See,
that's
that's the
something that.
thing about like being the bad guy. Again, like,
Mhm.
that's the thing. Do you have it in your character to be okay with being the bad guy for that day, or like forever? Like, that is also something you do have to live with. So I do see where you're coming from as well. Yeah.
Yeah. What about in cases where uh, the husband is the one telling the wife, well, my mom's in the kitchen, go and help her, or like, go and do this and do that. What would you? How would you approach that?
Okay, so sometimes, like, you really, as a girl, maybe you really do need like a nudge in that direction. Like, you didn't really think of, you didn't really think that, oh, my mother-in-law or whoever it is in the kitchen and I should go and help her. But there are other times where a man is overbearing about it, and if you get to a stage where you're like, if you care that much, why aren't you going to help your mum? That's your mum first and foremost. You owe her to help her. So,
Yeah, but
so
then here's the thing. If it's in the culture or in their family that, the boys don't do housework, then it's like, oh, well, she won't accept my help because, she doesn't see that boys should need to be in the kitchen.
but I just feel like he's a grown man now, and you're not a child anymore. No, I'm sorry. Like, I know that sounds a little bit harsh, but you're old enough now to go to the kitchen and be like, no, mom, I want to help. And yeah, sometimes your mom can be a little bit difficult and overbearing. And like, there are women out there that do not, like, they literally with their hand push their son or their husband out of the kitchen and stuff. But then if it's going to be like that, then there's, you see, if as a girl you're okay and you don't mind, every single time going and helping, that's fine. But then, that you're going to reach a stage where you've had enough, and then you're starting to build up resentment inside. And that's what
Yeah.
you don't want. You don't want a volcano to erupt inside.
Yeah. And yet again, I have to repeat, that is where a woman needs to stick up for herself, like,
Yeah,
because in that case not even the man is going to stick up for her, and she has to know
yeah.
what she can take and what she can't.
You need to know what your boundaries are going to be, and you need to be able to speak up, even if it's going to make you the bad guy.
Yeah. Yeah. So what happens in the case of, like, the woman visiting her parents or her family or her friends? Because you see, I've heard that friends have told me that, oh yeah, so after they get married, like my husband, he has this strict thing of when I can go and visit my family and how often I can go, and it's just created conflict in the marriage?
Mm. Yeah, that's really tough. It's really a tough one. Um, I actually don't have much to say about it simply because I live in another country far, far away from my parents. So there's not really this thing of like, when I can go and see my parents and when I can't. But in fact, now that you mention it, it's very common for girls who live out of the country to only go and see their family once a year. And I definitely did get comments about that and still do get comments about that because I sometimes go to the UK to see my family more than once a year.
Mm.
And the thing with me is that who made that rule anyway? Who said that you go once a year? Like, I feel like these things were put in place because of finances and the way things were back in the day with planes and transport and all of that. And it's like these things have just come to stay. Whereas my opinion is, why does it need to be that? Why does it need to be that? No, you just went. No, you have to wait until the year is over to go and see your family. Like, I just think it's a little bit ridiculous. Like,
Oh, well,
as long
that's
as you're,
interesting because yeah, well, that's interesting because I didn't even know such an expectation existed, once a year.
yeah, it does.
Um,
It does. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, well, because I mean, at the end of the day, it's whatever the couple can agree to, isn't it? I mean, sometimes
Exactly.
like
Because
the
I've
woman
had,
is
you see,
it's really tough because, for example, if the woman needs the help or whatever, it just every person's circumstance is different.
Mm, mm, mm. Like there's no such thing as a set day and a set weekend. Maybe it helps because like then you can work around your routine or something like that. But I think in general to have that one set day and to have that one fixed day, it's a little bit unfair. And here I think you've got to be easygoing. And this is something that you need to discuss again beforehand. Like how often will I be allowed to go and see my parents and things like that? Because I know so many girls who like pop in to see their mom like whenever, like they don't have a fixed day, and I think that's nice to have that.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah. That's the thing, discussing it beforehand, isn't it?
Yeah, because each marriage is different. The dynamic is going to be different. What works for your marriage won't necessarily work for somebody else's.
Yeah, definitely.
Mm. Yeah, yeah,
What about like when, let's say, if problems do arise and stuff, and then,
yeah. Mhm.
you know, what role does the husband play in that? Because now he's technically in the middle of like the his parents and his wife.
Mm.
So,
Look, me personally, I'm like, I know a lot of women, like most of the time, they just go running to their husbands and they're like, oh, XYZ happened and ABC. And actually, what actually happened, the actual, what do you say, the actual series of events that took place may even be different to the way that she describes because she perceived it differently or she's just, exaggerated the story a little bit. With me, I just tell like I just say what I need to say to the in-law that I need to say it to, basically.
mm,
Um, and like it's not always a good thing. Like I can actually vouch for the fact that it's not always a good thing, and sometimes it is good to now like go and tell your husband and stuff. But I think sometimes also women, they go to their husband because they just want to confide in somebody, and they'd rather confide about his family to him than to confide in somebody else.
but do you know what? I've heard people say that you shouldn't ever like tell your husband about, the issues that, for example, if you're having issues with his parents, then you shouldn't tell the husband because I don't know why they say that, but that's the advice that
I
some
think it
women give.
depends on the context. I'm going to have to respectfully disagree with you and say that it
No,
just
I,
depends
I
on the
don't agree
context
with this.
because,
I'm saying that there are
oh,
women
okay.
who say that, yeah.
Oh, okay. So, yeah, with them, I'm going to have to just, no, sorry, respectfully disagree with them because it just depends on the context. You know whether you're exaggerating a story or not. You know between you and Allah whether you're exaggerating a story to your husband or not. And here I say to the sisters, fear Allah, because sisters do this. And I think that that's something that people don't talk about. The fact that a woman goes to her husband and exaggerates about his mum or his dad or his siblings, Like, what gives you the right to stir between his blood? Like, what gives you the right to do that? So I think here, I don't know, like it's a tough one, like you say, but I just feel like to fear Allah definitely just comes here, I think, to be God conscious.
Yeah, definitely. I would say that, for me personally, for example, if you have an issue with his
Mm-hmm,
parents and you don't tell him about it, what's going to end
mm-hmm,
up happening is that,
mm-hmm,
uh, you know, he'll find out probably through his parents, and it'll be, of course, every story has two sides, but it'll be one-sided at this point.
mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
automatically, because remember, y- your parents, you feel you're indebted to them, for life,
Yeah,
isn't
yeah,
it?
of course.
And so
Mm-hmm,
automatically you're gonna, feel pity for them and stuff, and then take it on, like not understand it from your wife's perspective, and then later when your wife does tell you, then you're kind of going to be
mm-hmm.
like, it's going to feel insignificant because now you've already heard that one side of the story.
Yeah. Mm.
So yeah, I think it's also,
I think I think it depends on your husband's temperament as well.
I was just going to
Like,
say, yeah, because sometimes the man feels like if you tell him anything, like about his parents, even if it's not something bad, like just something that happened, he kind of feels like, it's an attack against them, kind of a thing.
yeah,
And then there's some men who, you need to like speak to, meaning, for example, your husband, you need to speak to him because he will be the mediator between the two.
yes, yes. Mm,
So
mm.
knowing which of the type your husband is, basically.
Yeah, yeah. Mm. Yeah, I think with the in-law thing, I think that you've just got to have, like, you really need to have an open mind, and you really need to understand that if you had conflicts with your own parents and your own siblings, there are definitely going to be conflicts, and you are going to have disagreements, but to be able to be mature enough to resolve those conflicts and to just learn the person, like you say, it's a learning curve to learn the person eventually, so you know what to do, what not to do again in the future, what to
Yeah.
bring up, what not to bring up in the future. It's the whole thing is just the learning curve. And I think with in-laws, you've got to keep an open mind, and also you've got to understand that, like, no person, okay, look, most of the time, no person is actually an evil person. Like, they've just got their weaknesses just as we do. And yeah, it gets annoying because we're living with them. But to be able to now kind of try and ignore that and kind of let it slide and be laid back about it.
Hmm. You know what? Not necessarily, they don't have to be an evil person, but sometimes people just, uh, you know, no, I wouldn't say enjoy it, but it's in their nature to make people's life difficult instead
But
of
again,
just
like,
living and
yeah,
let
but then
living.
don't
You
you
know what I mean?
yeah, but don't you think that boils down to, like, their own trauma and their own, like,
Yeah, and that is
um
what I was also gonna say.
mental problems and like personality disorders and stuff? And I feel like now that we know that that kind of stuff does exist, now to learn how to deal with that kind of a person, alhamdulillah, there's so much online as well on how to deal with like narcissism and stuff like that. So
Yeah. Yeah, well, exactly what I was gonna say, that understanding that, from your perspective as a wife or a daughter-in-law, that, your now the family that you're coming into,
mm,
they each are going to have their own like traumas and their own like
mm,
experiences in life that have taught them
mm,
certain things, and it could be like a surviving mechanism. And
mm,
so, understanding that and trying to be empathetic where needed, you know what I mean?
mm, mm,
But
mm.
so my final words of advice would be that, first and
Sorry, one more
foremost,
thing.
yeah.
Before we go on to final words of advice, I wanted to ask you that, like, the thing is, just how we need to be taught how to be a daughter-in-law or how to be a wife and things like that. I feel like the mother-in-law and the father-in-law or the in-laws in general, they need advice from people on how to be that person. So like, for example, with me, because I have so many brothers, there are things that I would say to my mom and dad that they shouldn't do.
Yeah.
Would you do the same? Would you tell your mom, like, or your dad or whoever, like,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, I already
be
do,
like,
to be honest. I already do.
mm,
And
mm,
also, you know, for example, my mom, if she herself has been through something, she would learn, and hopefully not repeat, not let history repeat itself. You know what I mean?
but unfortunately, history does repeat itself, and
Yeah, because
people
that's the
do.
thing. That's the thing. Like people, they say, for example, let's say they've had a really tough time with their in-laws, and then they're like, in their heads, they're like, oh, I would never put anyone through this. But then, subhanAllah, subconsciously, they end up doing that to their
They're doing
daughter-in-laws, and
exactly.
it's kind of
Yeah.
sad.
Mm, yeah. And it's very
And
common.
yeah, yeah. So to wrap up, I would say that first and foremost, um, where a woman can and is able to get her own accommodation, I would 100% like that would be at the
Yeah.
forefront of my
So would
advice
I.
to any woman, because it
Yeah.
just avoids any conflict. For example, in-laws can be the nicest people, but when you live with a person, you're bound to
Yeah.
have, some kind of
Mm,
altercation and conflict and all that. Um,
mm,
Secondly, I would say is that, to be more open to doing things just for the sake of Allah, without any expecting any sort of appreciation. And this goes for your spouse, your in-laws, whatever, whoever, is involved.
yeah.
And in
Mm,
life in general, the thing is that sometimes we expect even just a thank you, or even just, a smile of appreciation, and you don't get that sometimes. And that
mm,
is like, is sometimes, just is so disappointing. However,
mm,
if you have told yourself that, look, I'm doing this purely for the sake of Allah, he's gonna, he's noting it down, and it's gonna be rewarded with him. Like, it just
mm,
honestly, like, even if that
mm,
person doesn't appreciate it in any way, the fact that
mm,
you did it with a higher intention, honestly,
mm,
it will
mm,
just put your heart at peace. Um,
mm.
yeah, and yeah, and anything that you have to say?
I think ultimately, my takeaway advice, definitely everything that you said, um, but also reminding yourself that this isn't just some friendship or like a haram boyfriend that you just dump when things get bad. Like, you work at it,
Mm.
and it's very, very simple to be there and present when things are really good and they're well and things are hunky-dory, but it's really, really hard to love and to be there when things are tough and rough. But that's when you need to love the most, and that's when you need each other the most. And I just feel like the verses are so concise and so precise, where hunna libasun lakum wa antum libasun lahunna. Like, it's just so, so important that you understand that a garment doesn't just mean clothing. It can mean so many things, where like you're protecting each other, you've got each other's backs for so many things. And ultimately, like, fearing Allah and understanding that this relationship is based on God. Like, I feel like Allah has to be at the forefront of your relationship, and then
Yeah,
things, no matter how hard they seem, they will get better. And also to remind yourself that this is exactly what Shaitan wants, for like couples to break up, and for families to be apart from each other. And he'll keep coming, and he'll keep knocking, and he'll keep making things seem worse than they already are. And you can't let him win. And like, you've just got to like say the isti'adha, and like make lots of dua, istighfar, and just really pray. Just make lots and lots of dua, I think. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Mm.
Um,
Oh, also another thing, sorry, I just remembered. This is something that I wrote down in my notes, and that was, when you're going through a tough time, think back to the time when you first got married, or all the good times that you have had. Scroll back to like old pictures, where like you were on holiday, or your wedding day pictures, or whatever it is. Scroll back to old messages and things like that. And honestly, like, the rahmah that will just come flowing in you, it's amazing. Like, Allah will just open your heart.
you know, you, I agree to an extent, but then I also feel like if you, let's say, scroll back to those messages and everything, it kind of reiterates and reinforces the notion of how things have changed so much, and that those days are kind of like gone by days, and I don't know if they would ever come back.
You see, that's the thing. Like, I I don't know. I don't know whether it's my experience or what, but I just feel like no, gone are not gone those days. Like, I'm just trying to think now, like, if someone was to ask me to like describe my marriage right now at this moment, I would say like, Alhamdulillah, I'm happily married. I'm in such a tranquil and calm, peaceful place. And like, I don't know. I think that like it's like being on the ocean,
Yeah.
and it's like just rocky sometimes. Sometimes it's not, and I do
Yeah.
think that sometimes it can be even better than when you first got married. I don't know, this is
Yeah.
just my experience, but like,
Yeah, definitely. Like I said earlier, that for me personally, it's definitely better than when I first got married. Um,
mm,
and yeah, if somebody asked me how my marriage was going, or how do I feel being married, I would definitely say that it's subhanallah, it's something that Allah places. Like, it's not even like you work towards it, but ultimately it's coming from Allah.
mm,
That mawadda, that rahma, that love, and that affection. Um, and so yeah, it needs to be, if both spouses are working towards pleasing Allah, then
mm.
ultimately, Allah will put barakah and blessing into that marriage, isn't it?
Yeah. And again, like ultimately as well, it boils down to what you both want from life, which is so important to discuss from the beginning because sometimes you're
So
just
we've
not
come,
compatible.
yeah. So now we've come full circle, because then it kind of goes
Yeah.
back to, yeah,
Yeah.
kind of goes back
Subhanallah.
to ultimately what it is that you both want, isn't it?
100%. Yeah. Yeah. This was really, really interesting. Just kind of like going back all the way to the beginning and actually talking about it and hearing myself discuss it out loud. It was
Yeah.
quite the experience. Yeah.
Yes, and I hope that inshallah this was insightful and beneficial to the sisters who at any stage in their in life, whether they getting married, already in the marriage, facing some difficulties and stuff. Um, and yeah, Jazakallah khair for your time and for having this conversation with me. And I hope that you also took away something as well, because I definitely did.
Yeah, barakallahu fikum. Yes, even I did take away a lot. It was really insightful talking to you. And like, yeah, although we didn't see maybe eye to eye on in certain parts of the conversation, like I just feel that that's also really great because to be able to know how to kind of have a conversation and not really enforce your
Navigate through the
opinion on
differences.
somebody. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I think it's nice though. We're different but similar because
Yeah,
we were able to have that. Alhamdulillah.
yeah, alhamdulillah. So with that said, take care, and I hope to inshallah have you on future episodes as well. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.
If you enjoyed the podcast, don't forget to head over to our Instagram page at Real Muslima Talk and join the conversation.